David. If you've been watching some of the videos on my channel, you know that they're usually about travel or biking, taking trips around the world, a little bit of everything. My blog is actually called The Road That Beckons, and basically it just details my travels after I've been retired for the last couple of years. Today I'm out at Bear Creek State Park, or it's actually not a state park, it's a City of Lakewood Park, and it's a real gem of an oasis in the Denver metropolitan area. And I'm here today shooting a little bit of a different video because recently my journey, if you will, along the road that beckons took a little bit of a different path, and I'm just going to create this video to detail my journey along that path. I'm hoping, quite honestly, it's not that long of a path. But anyway, I just wanted to come out to where it all began back on April 1st. And I was out here riding my bike, as I often do. The trails out here are truly just spectacular for mountain biking. And lots of single track. It's usually fairly uncrowded. Just a beautiful place to ride and bike in the Denver metro area without being too crowded. Back on April 1st, I was out here riding my mountain bike on a beautiful day, not too much unlike this one. Bright blue Colorado skies, sunshine. It's a little cooler in April than it is today, but still a gorgeous day. I usually ride out here for anywhere from an hour to hour and a half, 2 hours. You can do all sorts of different loops and different trails out here. But on that particular day, April 1st, I had ridden for about an hour, had completed the loop around the park, had gone over Mount Carbon, up and over the dam, was on my way actually back to the car, when out of the blue, literally within 30 seconds, I experienced a very sudden shortness of breath, feeling faint on the bike to the point where I had to actually stop and get off the bike. I stopped at a little park bench that you'll see in the video here. I had mentioned that when I was on my bike ride, about an hour into the mountain biking, I had felt extremely short of breath. I had felt like I was going to faint. Absolutely felt like I had to stop. And this is where that all occurred. And I stopped at this little park bench behind me and sat for about 15 minutes or so before I could catch my breath to the point where I could continue. Still had a little bit more than a mile to go to get back to the car, which is in the direction directly behind me along the single track. But this is where it all began. Felt perfect up until this point. No problems, no symptoms, nothing. And literally within about 30 seconds down the trail, all of a sudden, there the symptoms came and forced me to stop. And that's what began this journey. And had to rest. That's highly unusual for me. I never have to do that when I'm riding my bike. So it was a little bit of a shock to the system. Of course, at that point thinking, well, maybe I've got the cold, maybe a touch of the flu. Heaven help me if it was a touch of the coronavirus that's going around right now. But it was enough of a concern. I was able to get back safely to the car and drive home. Took a couple ibuprofen and rested the rest of the afternoon. Felt a little bit better, but then took the next day off. And then the following day took a ride into Chatfield State Park, where lo and behold, after about another hour ride on my mountain bike, literally at about the hour mark, the same symptoms occurred. That day, it was a little bit more of a challenge. I was probably about 8 to 10 miles from the car on that day. It was a challenge getting back to the car that morning. And at the end of that, probably about half a mile to a mile from the car, I literally had to get off the bike and walk the remaining distance to the car. So at that point, was getting pretty seriously concerned. Very, very concerned with what was going on. Again, had no idea what the symptoms were being caused by. But at that point, started to think, well, maybe I need to go chat with my primary care physician and get checked out and see what's going on. Incident at Chatfield State Park, decided, yeah, it's time to go in, talk to the primary care doc, see if he can figure out what's going on. He did a spirometry check to make sure my breathing, my lungs were functioning okay, did a physical, did a chest x-ray just to make sure everything was okay there, gave me some prednisone, sent me home for a couple days just to rest, and told him to, or told me to call him if in fact the symptoms came back. A couple days later, the symptoms were still there, although the medicine had helped, but had not eliminated the symptoms. So went back to the doctor, and he did a little bit more checking. He was a little bit baffled by the symptoms, couldn't find anything obviously wrong. I was befuddled. Again, I had never had such symptoms before, and was concerned. So after the primary doc basically failed to figure out anything obviously that was wrong, I kind of figured out, maybe I need to go talk to my cardiologist. I had been under the care of a cardiologist for a number of years, primarily because I have a family history, more than anything else, of heart disease. My father, my grandmother, my grandfather, they had all experienced heart attacks in their late 40s to early 60s, and had basically passed away. And while that may not be the worst way to go, I was young enough that in my early 60s, that in today's world, that would be very, very young for something like that to happen. But again, given this family history, I had been going to the good folks out at the South Denver Health or Heart Center, and they had been taking care of me for years. I had switched over to a plant-based diet. I had eliminated most of the fun things, like alcohol, smoking, no drug use, again, no meat, no fish, no dairy, eating a very healthy diet, getting plenty of exercise. And my doctor had told me, said, you're doing everything you can possibly do to help yourself out here, but the reality is you've got this genetic component that just will not go away. It's going to be there, and we need to monitor it, and God forbid if there's ever a incident, we need to intervene and address it at that point. So went in to the cardiology folks, and the doctor was able to get me in, even though they weren't seeing elective patients at that point due to the coronavirus. And he checked me out, basically looked me over, and he had a difficult time, again, ascertaining if anything was immediately wrong. The symptoms I was describing, again, shortness of breath after serious exercise, and after a long hour of exercise, was something a little bit unusual. But still, he felt it was different enough that he wanted to get me in for some additional testing. And basically what he wanted to do was to send me in for an angiogram and a catheterization. He explained that if in fact they found something wrong, or if they found anything, a blockage of the arteries perhaps, that they would go ahead and put some stents in, and hopefully that would take care of whatever the symptoms were, and I could get back to living life as normal. So as much as I don't like doctors and tests and procedures and This was going to be an outpatient procedure, relatively short exercise of about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Um, and thought, well, better to be safe than sorry. So went ahead and set it up and scheduled it for a couple days after, and went in for that test. So the morning of the procedure was again just a gorgeous day. My wife drove me to Littleton Adventist Hospital. Again, it was going to be an outpatient procedure. She came in with me, but they didn't let her get too far because, again, of the coronavirus. They were not allowing a lot of visitors in to the hospital at that point. But got all set up for the procedure. Everything went fine. They did find a blockage in the right coronary artery, about a 99% blockage, which obviously is a pretty major deal. They were able to put 2 stents in. I did ask the question after the procedure, well, if I had a 99% blockage, how could I have been exercising at the level and intensity that I was? And they basically explained the heart's an amazing thing. Ultimately this would have caused a heart attack or some type of heart event, but that it's not unusual for people to be able to do incredible things and have blockages in their hearts and just not even know it. But the process went well. The doctor, who had done the procedure for me had basically felt, his gut was telling him something. He felt like I just need to have you stay overnight in the hospital for observation. And he said, we don't normally do that, but basically, let's go ahead and keep you overnight and see if everything looks okay. And I said, well, all right, I guess you did find a blockage, no problem with that. Let's go ahead and better be safe than sorry. So I went to bed about 9 o'clock that night, had given my wife a phone call before going to bed and wished her a good night, told her I loved her, said good night to my 2 pooches, my 2 dogs, and was fast asleep. So the next thing I know, I'm waking up in a completely different room and find out that I'm actually in the intensive care unit, having had in the middle of the night a fatal heart arrhythmia, which according to the doctors is a little bit different than a heart attack, where the heart attack actually kills some of the heart muscle. Apparently I didn't have that, but I did have a irregular rhythm to the point where my heart did stop. Now, quite candidly, at this point, I've got to profess, I'm not that religious of an individual. Everybody has their own beliefs, and I'm not going to bore you with mine. But I'm not that religious. But I really feel, looking back on all this, that if there are angels, they were certainly starting to congregate around me, because the sequence of events that it took to basically save my life and allow me to be sitting here today on this beautiful sunny afternoon and talk to you and share my story is really quite amazing. About 1 o'clock in the morning, a certified nurse assistant who was at the nurse's station in the observation suite where I was, again, because they weren't anticipating any problems, was looking at my monitor remotely and noticed something that didn't look quite right and came in to check on me and immediately found me unresponsive. Heart had basically stopped, and fortunately for my benefit, within a couple of minutes, literally after the event had started, she was able to start compression, CPR. They did use a defibrillator on me. Obviously they assembled a whole team of folks at that point once they realized what was going on. And again, fortunately for my sake, they were able to revive me. Otherwise, as they pointed out to me pretty clearly, if I had been anywhere else other than in the hospital that night, if I had been at home, anywhere else, I would have not survived that event. So again, as I mentioned, I think the angels were starting to assemble. But I wake up the next morning, I'm in the intensive care unit. I had been intubated, which means I was on a ventilator, which if you have never been on it, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. Of course, it's been in the news a lot recently because of the COVID excitement. Everybody seems like they're being put on ventilators for COVID. It is an absolutely god-awful, miserable experience. Now I understand with the COVID patients, they generally are putting them into a medically induced coma to help them deal with the trauma of both the disease and of the tube, and to help them basically mend in peace. But I woke up with the tube down my throat. They had mitts on my hands. My hands were basically tied to the sides of the bed so that as I awoke, I didn't immediately try to remove the tube that was down my throat. So one of the things that is probably apropos of the COVID situation is that overnight, when things were very serious with me, they weren't quite sure what the outcome was going to be. They had actually done a FaceTime with my wife. My wife had not been allowed in the hospital since dropping me off basically Tuesday morning for the initial procedure. Because of COVID, they're not allowing anybody except for patients to come in to the actual hospital setting. So, of course, she had received a horrific phone call in the middle of the night letting her know what had happened to me and that I was still alive, that they had been able to revive me, but they wanted to go ahead and do a FaceTime just in case, if that was the last chance she would get a chance to interact with me. At that point, they still didn't know what the outcome was going to be. I don't remember any of that FaceTime. The nurse told my wife, because she was concerned that I wasn't necessarily hearing what my wife was telling me, but that I apparently had tears in my eyes. So I was apparently responding to the conversation in some manner. But as I mentioned, I have no idea, no recollection whatsoever of that FaceTime conversation. I had done a mental inventory, counted to 10, wanted to see if I could remember if I had all my fingers and toes, what day of the week it was, those types of things. Couldn't communicate, although I was trying to make eye contact with the nurse to be able to communicate with her. So eventually she did give me a whiteboard and a marker. Of course, first question is, what the heck happened? And she explained again what had happened in the middle of the night, that they had been able to revive me, that I was doing as well as could be expected, and that I was now in the intensive care unit and they were taking good care of me. So what they think had happened was, again, I did not have a heart attack, where in the traditional sense the heart muscle is damaged and the heart basically stops because of that. But they felt like when they went in and they put the stents in, they called it reperfusion, which I had never heard of. But basically, with the 99% blockage in the artery, there was very little blood getting to the section of the artery past where the blockage was. And when they put the stent in, of course, all of a sudden, you have this sudden rush of fresh oxygenated blood into the artery in the section where it had not been used to having really much blood flow at all. And they think that that is what actually triggered the irregular heart rhythm. So I'd gone into Littleton Adventist Hospital on a Tuesday morning, again supposed to be a couple-hour procedure, released for home that afternoon. Had been kept for observation. That following night would have been Wednesday morning. I had the heart arrhythmia, woke up again Wednesday morning in the intensive care unit at Littleton Adventist. But by Thursday, they were trying to figure out, okay, well, we know you've had a heart arrhythmia. What are we going to do now? How are we going to treat this? So one of the doctors, I think it was one of the doctors, came up to visit me and talked about that they wanted to go ahead and give me a combination device that would include two things. First off, a pacemaker to monitor and control my heart rate. But they indicated in my situation that was probably the least of their worries. I didn't have any problem with my heart rate, although I did obviously have the heart arrhythmia. But the second part of the device, which I had never heard of, is also an automated defibrillator. In case I ever experienced this heart arrhythmia again, I would have this implanted device that would basically at that point deliver a shock and hopefully correct the arrhythmia and revive me. At that point, you know, what are you going to say? How are you going to argue with that? I'm not a fan of having anything implanted in me. Was obviously concerned about having had the initial event, but after talking and discussing with this doctor, felt like, yeah, this is probably the best way to go. They basically again pointed out they thought the heart arrhythmia was caused by the profusion of oxygenated blood reaching the portion of the artery that had not had oxygenated blood for years, and that it was likely I might never experience a heart arrhythmia again. But just to be safe rather than sorry, they didn't want to have a situation occur where I was out and about and away from a hospital setting and have this occurrence occur where it would be fatal. So I agreed at that point to the procedure. Guess what? Another outpatient procedure, although I was just going to go literally from the ICU down to the procedure room. It's only supposed to take about 2.5 hours. The device itself, about the size of a deck of cards, about probably 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick. It was going to be implanted underneath my left collarbone. It's basically a fancy battery that's supposed to last anywhere from 8 to 10 years, and then it would include a couple of leads directly introduced into the heart chambers, so that if in fact I needed to have the pacemaker function or the defibrillator work, they would be able to directly stimulate the heart. So the procedure for the implant of the pacemaker slash defibrillator was scheduled for Friday morning, and as promised, it did take about 2.5 hours. It went fine. Everything went the way it should. Again, they implanted it just below my left collarbone, probably a 4-5 inch incision, and everything went fine. They did elect to keep me for observation one more night, and just based on the fact of what had happened after the first procedure, again thought it would be prudent to keep me, and then with the plan of releasing me on Saturday morning. Saturday morning came and I was feeling pretty good. Again, the Friday procedure had gone perfectly fine, and they did in fact release me as promised into the good graces of my wife, who was anxiously awaiting my release. Of course, she watched me roll out, as they do in all hospital situations. You come out in a wheelchair, but as soon as I was able to get up on my own 2 feet and walk to the car with some assistance from my wife. Obviously, she was very happy to see me. I was ecstatic to see her. It was the first time that I had seen her since she had dropped me off on Tuesday. Again, Tuesday morning, she was anticipating waiting in the lobby for about 3 or 4 hours and taking me home Tuesday afternoon. Unbeknownst to her, she wouldn't see me until that following Saturday. So I was ecstatic to get out of the hospital, to still be alive, to be in relatively decent shape and condition, given everything that had happened to me. And at that point, I was happy just to be going home. Of course, being released to go home is not the end of the path in a situation like this, and it really was just the beginning. What I was going to be doing next was looking forward to what they call cardiac rehab, which basically entails a lot of workouts at a gym. The difference being from a standard gym that you are hooked up to all sorts of cardiac monitors that are tracking you as you're actually doing the exercise to make sure that the heart is responding the way that it should in that situation. COVID, of course, is impacting a lot of what's going on with my situation. The cardiac rehab has been delayed by about a month at a minimum. I got out of the hospital April 24th, and they're not looking at starting cardiac rehab until June 15th, which is obviously a long way out. In the meantime, what they've been allowing me to do is lots of walking, which is, as you can see, I'm walking today out at Bear Creek City Park, putting in probably 2 to 3 miles a day, so anywhere from 20 to 25 miles in a week. I'm not much of a walker, I'm more of a cyclist, and I've been pushing my cardiologist to allow me to get back on my bike. He's been pretty adamant. He's basically said not just no, but hell no, you're not getting back on a bike until you get through cardiac rehab. So really anxious at this point for cardiac rehab to begin. We'll of course take you through that process as I go through it. So the last month has certainly been an interesting experience for me. Obviously the heart issue is the primary concern, but in the last 3 to 4 weeks, I'd honestly have to say the recovery from everything else that they did to me in the hospital has probably been the toughest part of the journey. I had mentioned that I had been intubated, had woken up in the ICU with the tube down my throat. They had removed that. The recovery from that was very difficult. Lots of coughing, lots of hacking up fluids. And of course, on top of having had CPR and defibrillation, my chest was extraordinarily sore. I'm assuming I either had, well, sore ribs for sure, bruised ribs possibly. I don't think they had broken any ribs, but deep breathing, coughing was excruciatingly painful for about 3 weeks. And still, if I have a deep cough at this point, is not a comfortable experience. So that recovery from the tube was unexpected. Just the bruising from everything around the ribs to where they had poked and prodded me, put in different needles, IVs, where they put in the new device, the defibrillator and the pacemaker. Lots of bruising associated with that. So candidly, the heart itself has been doing, I think, about as well as could be expected. It's been everything else that has been the ongoing challenge in the recovery. But at this point, again, 4 weeks out, feeling pretty darn well, and looking forward to getting into cardiac rehab and hopefully being able to resume as close to a normal life as will be possible. So as I bring this video to a close, I just wanted to say a very special, heartfelt thank you to the nursing staff, the doctors, the CNA, Sydney. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for your kind attention to me in the middle of the night on that Wednesday. It's become a little bit of a cliche to thank the doctors and the hospital staff, the nursing staff. You guys obviously are doing a tremendous job, but you do that all the time, not just in a COVID event. So all this advertising, the signage, the howling at 8 o'clock that has become the rage, at least in Colorado. I'm sure they mean well by that, and I'm sure they're sincere with it. But all I can do is just give you again a very heartfelt thank you. I would not be here today on another glorious, glorious Colorado day without your efforts. So it's very much appreciated. I'm going to try to make the most of this second lease on life that you have all given me. And again, just from the heart, thank you very, very much.